Solidarity has appealed to FlySafair CEO Elmar Conradi to intervene in the ongoing strike by pilots. It's now entered its second week. Particularly, the unpredictable scheduling system appears to be a big problem for Labour. The Secretary-General of Labour Union Solidarity, that's Gideon du Plessis, says that the contentious roster issue is now causing significant concern among pilots and is negatively impacting their personal lives. He says that 10 pilots have resigned from the airline in just the last month because of the issue, and says that the deadlock with FlySafair will persist until workers' demands are met. The strike, which began last week, has affected flights with operations up to 30% believed to have been impacted.
We have moved. I cannot give you the exact number now, but we have moved lower than 8 anyway, because you have to in a negotiation. So we're not far apart. It's maybe, 0.5% or something like that we are apart. So it's not far. And so this is where we're at. And under normal circumstances, we would have had a settlement, but there are so many egos involved and things, sideshows, that actually makes it difficult. So the sustainability of the company, we obviously take that into consideration, but the stumbling block is not the sustainability. The stumbling block is people in the negotiating team. It's seemingly, they have quite a dislike in pilots, although that's your most important employees. And I think that's where the stumbling block lies. And that's why we ask the CEO. We understand he's quite a skillful negotiator, Elmar Conradi, and a more reasonable person to deal with. So we want him to start to get involved. And then we have a settlement.
Well, let's talk further about the FlySafair pilot strike now in its second week. Bring in the carrier spokesperson, Kirby Gordon. Kirby, welcome to The Full View on SABC News. So Gideon du Plessis from Labour Solidarity, the trade union, says they now want your CEO, Elmar Conradi, to be part of the negotiation process because they believe that would allow for actual headway to be made. Is that a concession or a condition, in fact, that FlySafair is willing to meet?
Thanks, Tembekile. I think the reality is that great leaders don't seek audiences, they seek solutions. And the reality is that Elmar Conradi has been involved in this process right from the very get-go. He's a very considered leader, and of course he's involved in every element of what's going on at the airline from top to tail. The individuals that are involved in the negotiations are of course mandated by him. He works very closely with what's going on. So just because he's not necessarily present in the room doesn't mean that he's not involved in what's going on. I think the reality is that we are equally finding it very difficult to negotiate with the union. I think the amount of misinformation that's being spread by them presently is also problematic and doesn't exactly bode well for good faith negotiations. For example, you mentioned this just before here that the union had said that we've had 10 pilots resign this month. We only get resignations on the 15th of the month and at the end of the month. Thus far this month, only 3 people have resigned from the 2,000 employees at FlySafair. None of them are pilots. So, a lot of this kind of information doesn't really exactly assist in finding a meaningful outcome.
So how many pilots have you lost then, if not in the last month, let's say this year, as a result of these very same Labour-related issues that the pilots are complaining about specifically?
I believe the year to date, the number of pilots that have resigned from the organisation sits around 14, which of 300 odd pilots is not a hugely significant number. Obviously, employees in every department come and go on a monthly basis. And what we, of course, manage and check very closely is what that attrition rate is. It's important that we maintain a healthy organisation in that regard. And naturally, any kind of spike in those numbers that would be unexplained would be something that we would look into with great concern.
But are these 14 resignations related to the issues around working conditions, around dissatisfaction with pay for pilots?
I can't say that that's what we've received from the exit interviews. What's quite common in the South African infrastructure, and certainly with us, is that we often are a training ground and a kind of a starting base for many pilots. So they come to join us. Many of them gain a lot of experience on some of their hours, and then often move on to overseas carriers to grow their careers, and hopefully at some point return back and look at us as a possible career airline.
So given the breakdown of trust, Kirby, which is very apparent between yourselves as FlySafair and Solidarity, the trade union, what hope is there that this deadlock can be broken, for instance, at your next meeting, which I understand is either tomorrow or day after tomorrow?
At this stage, I don't think a specific meeting has been set, not to my knowledge. I know that there is correspondence between the two parties with an attempt to find a settlement, so at least that's hopeful. And it looks like it's going well. I mean, I think it's really important to recognize that many of our pilots continue to operate and have shown an incredible amount of commitment to the company during this time, and we're greatly, very, very grateful for their support. But rebuilding trust with those on the other side of the line will take some time, and we're deeply committed to doing that. Look, FlySafair's success has always been built on strong teamwork, and that's the spirit that we want to return to, certainly with our pilots on board as well.
One of the reports I was looking at earlier suggested that the pilots, for instance, one of the things they want, and you can confirm this, is one promised weekend off work, so not on standby or any other technicality, but completely off. Are you willing to give them that? And are you then willing to give them, if this is true, a revised demand of 7% on the wage increase, which would have been down from the initial 10? Are those fair terms?
So, Timothy, it might surprise you to learn that actually this weekend rule is something that's already in place. The union has put down a number of demands in terms of what they want to seek to achieve from the roster, and those elements are actually already in place. The reality is a little bit more complex than that. Each and any one of these rules in and of themselves really sound very reasonable, but the problem is when they are compounded upon one another over years and years and years of negotiation, you ultimately end up in a situation where you have a lot of constraints on your ability to derive productive time out of pilots. So what our proposal was, which was unfortunately declined by the union this weekend, was the establishment of a meaningful committee that would allow for the pilots themselves to determine their own work-life balance by virtue of these roster rules. Every element of it is a bit of give and take along the way. So the thought was to say, let's establish a productivity baseline that would make sense, that would allow the operation, the airline to operate sustainably in the long run, and then give the employees themselves the power to say, we require XYZ rules out of the scenario, because everything, as I say, is a balance. For example, you might find that if you implement something like one weekend guaranteed every 4 weeks, that might then impede upon your ability to achieve success in leave bids down to a certain lower percentage. If you extend that to say one weekend every 5 weeks, you might increase those chances, 6 weeks even more so. So there are a lot of trade-offs that it would really make sense for these guys to be able to manage themselves, and that's really the kind of empowerment that the company seeks to offer them, so that we can work forward in a collaborative fashion.
But why should they be the ones to manage themselves when you consider how contentious this issue has been? Why can't the company itself come to a commitment that you agreed to? Because it sounds, Kirby, to me as though the 4 weeks, in fact, is not at all ideal for FlySafair.
I think the reality is that we're actually quite indifferent to what the build of the actual design of the roster is, so long as the productivity metrics are achieved at the end of the day. And the reality is that there are changing wills amongst the pilot group. What suits one pilot doesn't necessarily suit another one, and we've been doing this long enough to realize that there also are changes of wills and changes of the cohorts within the pilot groups. And so I think the opportunity to be able to test and learn and see and really own that whole process is something that would be of value to the pilots.
The challenge then, though, with collective bargaining is that you can't tailor-make terms of employment, especially in an environment like yours, to the individual. Hence, there needs to be general consensus as per what Solidarity was able to get with more than 90% of the unionized workers last night confirming that they want to remain on the stairway.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, the reality is the consensus around that was just for a decline of the offer, and that's quite simple to achieve rather than a constructive actual proposal, which is actually really what's largely been lacking from the organization thus far. The reality that we seek to actually obtain is the fact that these roster rules, these specifics, are not really substantive matters. What should be substantive is a process, an organization or a committee that has a specific constitution that can manage all of these processes, that empowers the team to actually build the lifestyle design that they require out of their roster, not the specific rules. Realistically, a lot of these rules that the guys are aiming for within their demands at this set have unintended consequences that they're probably not going to be aware of in the long run, and it really wouldn't surprise us to learn that a year down the line they seek to challenge those because of the consequences that might be inherent to them on another side of their roster reality. So we really feel that a working collaborative environment is really is far more meaningful than one that is just based on a crude rule.
What has the impact been on FlySafair's bottom line? I know SAA came in last week to help you out in terms of the people who otherwise would have been stranded, but so far, are you bleeding money?
Thembekile, I mean, the revenue is down. Naturally, we're taken down our flying by about 30%. We have to right-size our operation by virtue of the number of pilots that we do have on the team that are actively operating at this stage. That's important so that we can offer a sustainable and reliable service to our customers, who, of course, are our main aim. The reality is, in this situation, absolutely nobody wins. You know, the airline struggles along without revenue. We obviously have to deal with the reputational fallout as a result of this. The union itself is struggling because they really have pilots at home that are not earning money. They need to get them over the line. Obviously, customers are not winning in this scenario, with about 18% of the seats out of the market. There's a vacuum there. We've seen the market already respond to that, and across the board, prices are really high in a time when they shouldn't be. So it's a lose-lose-lose scenario all round, and it's really important that these parties find opportunity to meet one another in the middle and move a little bit.
Kirby Gordon, good to talk to you as always. Kirby is the spokesperson for FlySafair, where a pilot strike has now gone into its second week.